Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Damage Report. I am John Earl and we've got a big show. We're gonna be starting off with the big news on Paul Manafort. Both yesterday's big Paul Manafort news and then the bombshell report from The Guardian earlier today. We're gonna be breaking down the implications of that reporting and how the relevant figures inside of that story have responded to it. A little bit later on, we've got Giving Tuesday, although I guess technically we all have it. We're gonna be talking about some of the charities that might merit your support on this day of international giving. We are gonna talk about political violence inspired by social media activity. We have been told that just because a politician says crazy things and has crazy followers, that doesn't mean he has any responsibility for what happens. But does the Secret Service actually agree? We will take a look at some video evidence of that. Later on the show, Emma Vigeland of Rebel HQ is going to be joining us. It turns out that some of the rhetoric from potential 2020 presidential nominees, those who might run on the Democratic side, has changed pretty drastically over the past week or two. So we're going to talk about some of the implications for who might be announcing in the near future that they will be running for the Democratic nomination. And then we'll be closing out the show with an epic Meanwhile In, taking a look at news from around the planet and around the solar system, actually. A lot has been going on recently, and so I'm very excited to get to that as well. But we're gonna be starting off with the big story of the day. Paul Manafort is all over the place in the news. Both yesterday's revelations that his plea deal that he'd been involved in, the cooperation agreement with the special counsel's office, has apparently imploded, and then developments today as well. But let's start yesterday, where the former campaign manager of Donald Trump back during that 2016 election, who's been working with the special counsel's office after he received a buttload of charges just a couple of months ago, wanting to avoid additional charges in his second trial, which was pending at that point, signed on to an agreement with the special counsel's office. He apparently has not been abiding by that for literally months, potentially the entire time that he's been involved in it. So this is from Mueller's team. He said, after signing the plea agreement, Manafort committed federal crimes by lying to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the special counsel's office on a variety of subject matters which constitute breaches of the agreement. So at this point, the Mueller team has not provided any more evidence of actually what those lies were, although they have said that they're going to file a report that makes clear both what they allege he lied about and then the evidence to show it in advance of his sentencing, which is expected to come at some point in the near future. The defendant's lawyers, this is Paul Manafort's lawyers, they dispute that he has actually lied to the special counsel's office, writing that Manafort believes he has provided truthful information, which could mean a lot of different things. But both parties signaled that further cooperation would be fruitless and said Manafort's sentencing should be scheduled. So at this point, if you're Manafort's team, I should say, it really doesn't matter whether you believe that you are being unfairly treated by Mueller. It doesn't look like that agreement is going to be able to continue. They are going to have to do something about it, and that something is likely sentencing him. So that by itself is not a gigantic change from the situation we had a week ago. Paul Manafort was working with the special counsel's office, but we knew from the beginning that this was to get a reduced sentence. It was not to save him from spending time in prison. He was always going to end up there. This is a guy that has committed any number of different crimes for literally years, both since he was Donald Trump's campaign manager and in the years before it. The sort of thing you would want to know if you were a presidential candidate choosing a campaign manager, but Donald Trump was able to slide by that. And so the question remains, until we know what he actually lied about, speculation. What did he lie about? And with Paul Manafort, there's actually a lot of different things that it could be. Now, the biggest potential one, I guess, is information about his work as the campaign manager for Donald Trump. So what did he actually get up to during that multi-month period? So it was expected when Donald Trump had effectively locked up the nomination, there was still the specter that Ted Cruz would provide some sort of last-minute challenge. And so Paul Manafort was originally brought in to manage that potential situation. Donald Trump did not want anything on the floor of the convention manager. There you go. He didn't want any sort of battle on the convention floor, so Paul Manafort was brought in to manage that. And by all measures, supposedly, Paul Manafort was actually very successful at providing some sort of deal both with Ted Cruz's people and some of those who were still sort of against Donald Trump at that point. It was only after that he was brought on to be the campaign manager, but he was apparently a busy guy during that period. So what activities did he get up to at the convention? Since the convention, it's possible that he was lying about that. It's also possible, considering the nature of many of the charges against Paul Manafort, lots of them of a financial nature. We know that he has previously committed fraud in multiple cases having to do with his finances. It is possible that that fraud continued up until the past few months, and that might be the basis for what Mueller has said yesterday. It's possible that some of the spending that he did, we know he had extensive lists of fancy clothes and rugs and trips and apartments, things like that. It's possible he attempted to hide some money from the special counsel. That could go into this area of lying. And it's also possible that it has to do with the actual ongoing investigation of Paul Manafort himself. Now, this is a guy that we know had apparently been intimidating witnesses. So text messages were released a couple of months ago. It is possible that he was lying about that. We don't know for sure, but we do know one thing now, thanks to The Guardian. He apparently was visiting Julian Assange at a very critical point in his work for Donald Trump. So 3 trips, this is being reported by multiple sources to The Guardian. He went to see Assange back in 2013, 2015, and in spring 2016. So all of this is after Julian Assange took asylum in the embassy. After his big work with WikiLeaks, Paul Manafort began doing these trips. Now, I don't know about the 2013, 2015 trips, but in spring 2016, this is on the cusp of him becoming the campaign chairman for Donald Trump. Now, how do we know about this? Well, 2 sources say that his first visit to the embassy took place a year after Assange sought asylum there. That is true. We also have a separate internal document written by Ecuador's Senine intelligence agency and seen by The Guardian that lists Paul Manafort as one of several well-known guests. It also, by the way, mentions Russians. I would keep better documentation if I was the intelligence service for that country. Russian seems a little bit vague. But apparently during a very critical period after the convention, but before the release of WikiLeaks' trove of documents from the DNC and Hillary Clinton and all of that, he went and visited Julian Assange. Now, for the previous trips, I have no idea what the legitimate reason for him to visit Julian Assange is. It has sort of just come to me over the past couple of years that all of these people know each other for some reason. So maybe there's some sort of business thing. Maybe he was going to work on behalf of Julian Assange to try to get some of the legal charges that were floating over his head that forced him to retreat to the embassy, maybe to clear up some of that. I don't honestly know. But I do know that when he visits him in 2016, virtually the month before the documents start to come out, that certainly seems a little bit more questionable. Now, to be fair, both Manafort and WikiLeaks deny that this ever happened. Julian Assange says that it's made up. Manafort said he wasn't involved in the hack and says the claim is 100% false, although he would not give any additional information to The Guardian about those visits. WikiLeaks posted today, remember this day when The Guardian permitted a serial fabricator to totally destroy the paper's reputation. WikiLeaks is willing to bet The Guardian $1 million and its editor's head that Manafort never met Assange. So strong denunciation. I don't know, honestly, at this point. There are supposedly multiple sources that have said that he did go there. We don't know what evidence they have presented to back that up. The documentation from the Ecuadorian intelligence service could be authentic. It could be falsified. We don't know. WikiLeaks and Manafort are saying that it didn't happen, but that is also the sort of thing they would say that if it did happen. So hopefully at some point we will have a little bit more information to judge for ourselves whether those trips actually happened. But we can speculate at least briefly about why it might have happened. So as George Takei, he doesn't often get quoted on this show, but he laid out an interesting timeline, if we could bring that up on a tweet this morning. Manafort joins Trump campaign in March of 2016. That is before he's the actual campaign manager. That's when he's the convention strategy manager. Manafort visits Assange, if you believe this new reporting from The Guardian in spring of 2016. He is then elevated to campaign manager after that, and that month and the following month, WikiLeaks begins releasing the Democratic emails. Now, that by itself is not proof of anything, but it's questionable. I mean, if it turns out that The Guardian's reporting is true, and again, all the caveats. They are saying it's not true. Manafort denies it, WikiLeaks denies it, Julian Assange denies it. All of that said, if you believed that there was collusion between the Russian intelligence services that apparently stole these documents, WikiLeaks, which released the documents, whether they knew it was from Russian intelligence or not, and the Trump campaign, I mean, you already had the Trump Tower meeting, which was incredibly questionable, especially the messaging around it from Donald Trump Jr. Bear in mind, Paul Manafort was at that meeting as well. If he is also traveling down to Ecuador to see Julian Assange immediately in advance of those being released, I mean, come on. Like, at some point, as soon as it's confirmed, we have to be willing to call a spade, as they say. We have to be willing to identify what is clearly going on. There was collusion. That is what it appears to be. Again, all the caveats in the world, but this does not look good for Paul Manafort. It doesn't look good for Donald Trump, which probably explains why he went on another tweet storm against Robert Mueller earlier today. I'm not going to subject you to those actual tweets, but Donald Trump he's dealing with these new revelations like a guy who is really worried about what is being revealed. Now, what will be revealed in the next few months or a few weeks before the Mueller report is coming out, we don't.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Don't yet know, but already things are looking pretty bad for the president. That said, we are going to take our first break. When we come back, the Secret Service steps in to give their views on what popular people with big social media followings, when they potentially inspire their followers to violence, whether joking or not. What do they think about that? We'll break that down after this. This week sees a showdown on the floor of the Senate, mainly led by Bernie Sanders, actually, over the future of the US involvement in the Saudi war on Yemen. To talk about both that and other potential options to get us out of that conflict, I am very happy to be joined on the show by Mark Weisbrot, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you here. So as I said in that intro, we have Bernie Sanders, who is leading this push to separate us from our involvement in that conflict. But before we get into that and some of the other potential options, if you could just let us know, I don't know how much the US media and regular people across the country are sort of following that conflict. What is actually going on in Yemen right now? How bad is it?
Well, it is really bad. And I'm glad you used the word involvement, by the way. That's a word that you don't really hear much or see in the media. They usually say complicity or support. But the United States military is really involved. They're refueling the planes in midair, which is essential to the bombing that the Saudi and UAE planes are doing. And they're targeting, they're providing intelligence, logistics. So the US military is involved, and that's the basis of this bill. But about how bad it is first, the UN has said it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, that 14 million people are on the brink of famine. Tens of thousands of children have already died. And there's a cholera epidemic that has killed thousands of people. And all of this is a result of the war. The Saudis and the UAE have actually used mass starvation of a weapon. They've cut off, they've blockaded supplies, food imports from coming in, and they've bombed infrastructure. Water infrastructure. That's part of the reason for the cholera epidemic, and also just the cutoff of food. And so these are the kinds of things that should never be allowed to happen. And of course, the U.S. military should not be participating in it at all, no matter what.
Well, thankfully, there are some politicians that are pushing to cut off our involvement in that conflict. As I said, Bernie Sanders is going to be he's going to be making a move. I believe today, actually. There's this war powers resolution in the Senate and in the House. What is actually being done, and how likely is it that you think something could be passed that Trump would actually abide by, that we would cut off our involvement in that war?
Well, it's very likely that these bills can pass. And it is the law that he would have to cut off the U.S. military involvement if these bills pass. So in the Senate, the one you mentioned, I think is going to come up for a vote tomorrow, but sometime this week. This is led by Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee from Utah. And you have 5 Republicans who are going to vote for it. So if the Democrats hold, that is, if none of the Democrats defect this time, it will pass. And in the House, of course, you have this now supported by all the leadership in the House, including Pelosi, but the leaders of the various committees, Judiciary, Appropriations, Intelligence, Foreign Affairs. So these, this could pass in the House as well. And this is the law. A lot of people don't know this, but there's the Constitution, of course, says that Congress has the say on matters of war and peace. That's in Article 1. But also you have the 1973 War Powers Resolution, which reemphasized that and spelled out that when the president introduces forces into hostilities, as the Trump has done in this war, they have to, and the Congress can invoke this War Powers Resolution of 1973 to cut it off, to say you have to get out, and so this is why you see these efforts from the administration, the people who support this war. They've been kind of getting more desperate about it because they don't want this to happen. And they also don't, the Pentagon's lobbying very hard because they don't want this precedent. All these people who believe that the president should be able to wage war without the consent of Congress are all very much worried about this, not only because of the war, but because it's the Congress exercising its constitutional authority and using the War Powers Resolution, which provides, has some special provisions. For example, they can't block this vote in the Senate. That's why it has to happen. It has special provisions for Congress to use its constitutional authority to cut off U.S. military involvement in this really genocidal war that the Saudis and their allies are carrying out.
Yeah, certainly anyone that wants the presidency to have more and more, unilateral control over this is going to be worried about setting any kind of precedent in this war. But I am curious, considering how bad the conflict is, the human toll that we're seeing, although the media doesn't talk about it that much. I am curious about the context. So the killing of Jamal Khashoggi just a little bit more than a month and a half ago at this point, apparently sanctioned by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. That got quite a bit of media coverage for at least a few weeks. Do you think that killing, and obviously how bad it makes Saudi Arabia and its government look, has that helped at all to push people in the direction of cutting off our involvement?
Well, it's made some difference in terms of all the bad press that Saudi Arabia is getting, and Yemen has been mentioned. But the thing that really wasn't getting much press and still doesn't get very much is that the Congress has these 2 bills. They've been doing this since November of last year. And so this has been an ongoing struggle, and it's been getting closer, and each vote that takes place brings us closer to getting out. And the media has mostly ignored the Congress, even though they've reported more and more on Yemen. And so that's the problem. And luckily you have thousands of people across the country working on this, and people calling their senators right now. And that's the thing that everybody's being asked to do, is to call their senators and make sure they vote for this in the Senate. Okay. And then, of course, it'll come back in the House as well. But this has really been the struggle. I think it's not because anybody supports this war. There's very few people support this war. It was just a poll showing the public doesn't support the war, and I think most of the journalists don't support the war. The New York Times editorial board has written more than one editorial where they condemned U.S. Participation in the war. And so I think it's a lot is that many journalists and editors are not used to the idea of Congress really deciding these things. Mm-hmm. And that's what people have to get used to. This is the Constitution, this is the law, and the Congress has the say, and that's what's going to happen.
And hopefully at some point this week we'll know what the future of at least the Senate side of this will actually be. Mark Weisbrot, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, we're going to be joined tomorrow by Ro Khanna, who I know on the House side has been working on this sort of measure as well. Hopefully, he'll be able to fill us in on the progress on the House side. That said, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, lots more news to get to. Welcome back, everyone. A little bit later on the show, Emma Vigeland of Rebel HQ is going to be joining us, so stick around for that. We're going to talk about some of the potential early announcements for the 2020 Democratic nomination. I mean, we've already had one. More could be coming any day now. I want to give you just a brief final update, potentially, on the midterms that we just experienced. The last undecided congressional race has now been decided. It was California's 21st district, and Democrat T.J. Cox ended up beating Republican incumbent David Valadao. Out of 111,000 votes, less than 400 separated them, but the Democrat ended up winning. That was the 7th House flip in California, the 40th overall. So we're at least done with that in terms of the election returns. And so, again, I've done a couple of videos about this. I hope that we have settled on the truth here, but this conversation about whether there was a wave, it was 40 seats. That was actually higher than the final predictions in advance of the election. They predicted 35, Cenk predicted 38, and people said he was being too optimistic. Well, it ended up being 40, so just for the record. That said, let's move on to other news. Tom Arnold, the actor, you're probably familiar with him, he got in trouble not too long ago for a tweet he sent out. The tweet said this, it was, "I say put up or shut up, real Donald Trump. Me versus you, for America, first body slam wins. Any rally, anytime between now and the midterms, hashtag Friday feeling." It's a very body slammy feeling. It's not a common one. And so he sent that out in response to Donald Trump speaking favorably about Greg Gianforte, the Republican congressman who famously body slammed a reporter and then was elected to Congress. He wasn't visited by the Secret Service, but Tom Arnold actually was. And while they were talking with him at his home, Tom Arnold taped the interaction. Apparently the Secret Service knew it was being taped, and now, thanks to Mother Jones, some of that video has come out. And an interesting point kept getting raised. Let's see if you can identify it.
And in your type of case, what we're concerned with a lot too is the audience it could reach.
Absolutely.
Somebody to
I did see a crazy reaction to it.
Because you see a lot of times when we've had previous attempts on the president's life, they got motivated by somebody. You look at Reagan and
it's horrible. It's horrible.
So that's it's kind of twofold. We're addressing the tweet, but we also want to make sure what you said, what it can be taken as.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then obviously at the end of this whole thing, the biggest thing is to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Absolutely.
You're a public figure, so as we've gone on several interviews with more like individuals who are public figures in society, it's not always concerned about, obviously we addressed anything that you may have tweeted or posted on Facebook or something, but what we have to worry about, you guys have an audience, like you say, inciting those that follow you.
Yeah.
By being a public figure, like I said, you might have used it in like a kind of comedian type sense or whatever, being very comical about it, but there's a lot of people out there who they really follow Tom Mark. He said this, that was the exact thing I needed. That I need to go get this and go in at the next rally and carry this out. But you might have meant it in total like playful jest. Yeah. So those are the type of things that we, when it comes to that type of person with a public platform like you have, you could, want to, incite or motivate people like that would actually go out and do something.
Okay, so that is absolutely awesome. So I want to thank Tom Arnold for two things, releasing that tape and his role in True Lies, which was actually awesome. And so what you saw continually coming up there was that the Secret Service went to interview Tom Arnold for his tweet. Now, they don't believe that Tom Arnold is gonna go to a Trump rally, rush the stage and body slam the president, but they're worried that he has a lot of followers on social media. They're worried that if he says something crazy, if he says perhaps violence should be an option, that one of his followers might do something. Okay, now bear in mind, just a couple of days after the Secret Service went to Tom Arnold's home, do you know what happened? A gigantic Trump fan sent pipe bombs to virtually every one of Donald Trump's political opponents. And we began a national conversation about what actually caused that. And we were told over and over, no politician, especially Donald Trump, is responsible for potentially inspiring people to acts of violence. If he continually threatens people like Maxine Waters, if he's saying that people are behind plots to get caravans of immigrants into the country, if he's spreading these nationalistic messages and advancing the rhetoric of white supremacists, things like that, he's not responsible for any of that. Even when one of his fans who goes to his rallies, has his paraphernalia, has a Trump van, targets all of his biggest constantly attacked opponents, he's not responsible. But Tom Arnold, for a jokey tweet about body slamming, he has to worry now about whether one of his followers might do something. So look, we can have this BS conversation at the media level, but the Secret Service, the people who actually investigate threats against these politicians, they apparently do take it seriously. The people who have made it their job to ferret out these sorts of threats, they do think that people should be held responsible for the things that they inspire. Hopefully going forward, they can have their boss held to the same standard. That said, I want to move on to one other thing. Today is Tuesday. It's also Giving Tuesday, a major international holiday that inspires people to give something back. This started just back in 2012, actually. The 92nd Street Y in New York started this, thinking that after days of massive food consumption and then days of massive shopping consumption, maybe we can have a holiday where we actually give something back to people. And it's been pretty huge, actually. Back in 2012, that first year, people apparently were inspired to give about $10 million. That began to rapidly rise. And by 2017, the last year we have data for, obviously, it was up to $247 million on this day. Now, if I were to compare that to the amount people spend on Black Friday or Cyber Monday, it's virtually nothing. And in fact, even compared to overall charity, it is somewhat small. Back in 2017, individuals donated $286 billion. But this is still an important holiday because it inspires people to think, once again, not just the rich people that they have their foundations or whatever, but regular people to actually take a look at what charities are out there, think about what you want to support, and give just a tiny fraction of what you have recently been spending on food and TVs and iPads and things like that. Now, there's a million different charities that you can go for. I know everybody has their different passions. I am going to suggest a few. These are chosen not because they're the most important charities to me necessarily, but because they have been rated by organizations that track how much money is actually taken in and how much is spent in a productive way to actually help people. These are safe bets for charities that actually also provide a very good benefit to the people that they're targeted at. So the Malaria Consortium, very important one. Malaria, one of the leading killers in the entire world, especially of kids as well in Africa. So donating to the Malaria Consortium can help to cut down some of those needless deaths. Very important there in a number of different countries. The Evidence Actions Deworm the World Initiative, government-run deworming programs in a number of different countries. That is absolutely huge as well. A good number of these that are rated very highly are actually small charities that deal with parasitic infections. We tend to focus on the things that kill people, but there are also things that make life kind of a living hell, and dealing with that as well is a great use for your charity dollars. We have the Helen Keller International. It's vitamin supplementation to prevent child mortality in sub-Saharan Africa. That is a great one. And then down at the bottom, if we could jump ahead, there's also Give Directly, which I just recently actually found out about. So this is not a thing where you give money to an organization which then purchases things that it gives to people. This is direct cash transfers to the poorest individuals in Kenya and Uganda, which means some of the poorest people literally on the face of the earth. The idea being that the people who know best what these people actually need are the people themselves. And so directly giving them money allows them to either buy vitamins, medicine, malaria nets, things that allow them to start businesses, stuff like that. So a lot of different options here. These are just suggestions, but anything you can do to give back today or any day is obviously a great thing. And while there's a lot of great charities here in the US that you can support, very important stuff. We also love if you become a member of TYT, that would be great, tyt.com/John. Around the world, huge issues that need to be dealt with. And if our government is gonna be stepping back from I guess, dealing with the severity of that problem, Donald Trump has little interest in any of that. It is going to be up to us as individuals to step in and fill that gap. Hopefully, Giving Tuesday, we can start actually doing that. Now, that said, we are going to take one more break. When we come back, Emma Vigeland is going to be joining us. We're going to be breaking down some of the latest on Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, and others. What are they saying about potential runs for the Democratic nomination in 2020? We'll break that down after this. We have just finished the midterms, so it is obviously way too early to be speculating about who is going to be running for the Democratic nomination in 2020, but we're going to do it anyway because it is going to be incredibly important. It is going to be our lives for like 2 years, so let's just dive right in. And helping us dive is Emma Vigeland of Rebel HQ. Emma, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, John.
Good to have you here. So there's been some developments on the Democratic side. People who are changing their rhetoric, potentially could be announcing that they'll be running at some time in the near future. I saw that you were tweeting a lot about it yesterday. And I actually want to ask you about one of your tweets. You polled your audience on Twitter about who they think is definitely going to run at this point. What was some of the consensus?
I mean, the guy who's right above my shoulder, where is he? There we go. That's Bernie Sanders. This is my bedroom. So yeah, Bernie Sanders is definitely going to run. I mean, he's made it perfectly clear. He says if he feels he's the best candidate to defeat Trump, he will run. He knows as well as I do that nearly every poll indicates that he is the strongest or tied for the strongest candidate to beat Trump. I mean, obviously we don't know. There's a lot that could change, and saying that he would have beaten Trump in 2016 is counterfactual. We'll never know for sure, but all data shows that he likely would have beaten Trump by a very large margin compared to Hillary Clinton. And then, of course, I think Cory Booker has been setting the stage to run for a very long time with lots of speeches and camera time. Kirsten Gillibrand strategically voted against every single Trump nominee so she could run in 2020. Elizabeth Warren is setting herself up to run in 2020, although I don't think she'll do as well as many people think. I think Beto's going to run too, although he just conferenced with AIPAC and takes a lot of pro-Israel money, which I didn't really know.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, I want to talk briefly about Beto because I noticed that he apparently now, when you ask him, he's not ruling out a run, which is interesting. I know that he's incredibly popular. He did very well against Ted Cruz in terms of the polling. I don't feel he did great in the debates, but what do I know? But anyway, he narrowly lost in Texas, which is difficult. People are very excited about him. In some of the polling I've seen where they ask about potential people who might be running, he's like third or fourth now, jumping above some of the names that you were just mentioning. So you think he's definitely going to run? And also, do you think that he's really earned it at this point?
Not really. I think he's definitely going to run. And I think he's Obama to me. He didn't take corporate PAC money because that's the requirement right now for anyone who's going to run in 2020 or anyone who wants to position themselves as a progressive. But he's very charismatic. He's young. He has his finger on the pulse of the progressive movement. But I don't think that necessarily makes him incredibly progressive. He's certainly not more progressive than Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or I would even say Kamala Harris, who's someone who is intriguing to me. Yeah, she has that sketchy history with taking a donation from Steve Mnuchin and not prosecuting him, but she does have some progressive inclinations, and I find her to be an intriguing candidate. If I was to guess right now, I would say that her and Bernie Sanders will be the last two standing when it's all said and done.
Oh, that's interesting, because I was actually going to turn to, we're going to start off with this gigantic pool, it looks like. It looks like it's going to be something like the Republican side the other time around. And This time we're going to have quite a few either progressives or people who are branding themselves as progressives. We also have some centrists and then some oddball choices like Michael Avenatti. He really thought that he was going to run. Maybe the recent news will stop that from happening and spare us all of that.
You could have seen my eye roll from space there.
Exactly. Yeah, the new Mars lander could see it actually. So look, you think it's going to be Bernie and Kamala. If this turns into a long campaign of the sort that we had last time around, we actually had the situation where Bernie and Hillary were the ones for month after month. Do you think that people are going to hang in there? Do you think that Bernie Sanders is going to be hampered by other people who are running on a platform that is at least ostensibly progressive? Is this going to be a long, dirty race, do you think, like the last one?
I do, but I think that it'll be different in the sense that it's going to be much like the Republican primary of 2016, as you alluded to. It's going to be a crowded stage, and people are going to have a tough time differentiating themselves, but there are a few people who have positioned themselves smartly. Bernie Sanders has now enormous name recognition. He's the most popular politician in the country, and he has the credibility to say, I started all of this. I started all of these proposals that people are now piggybacking on. And he's just an authentic guy. You know, the way he speaks, people love him. Kirsten Gillibrand, I don't think is super progressive, but has very smartly, I may have mentioned this before, positioned herself by saying, I did not vote for any Trump nominee, and I'm the pro-woman candidate. I said Al Franken needs to resign. I am a Me Too candidate. That's me. And she's not taking corporate PAC money.
Yeah, that's true.
And, it's hard to say how the other ones are going to differentiate themselves. I think Beto might be the young, charismatic guy, but.
Yeah. At least one more question, a little bit of fun. Who do you think is going to have the most pathetic run for the Democratic nomination?
Didn't the Starbucks CEO say he wanted to run?
I didn't see that actually. I've seen a number of like tech billionaires and other billionaires. Bloomberg was talking about it. There are these names that I see like, oh, they're sort of floating a trial balloon, and I think, really, you really think that that's the direction the country's going in? But they have a lot of money. They definitely feel entitled.
And a lot of yes people around them. I think Cory Booker will have a pretty pathetic run. He is someone who I find to be uninspiring, to say the least, despite the fact that he's very convinced of his own inspiring nature.
Yeah, I wish that, so I saw him on Sarah Silverman's show, and man, he talks a good game, but I wish that he was there in terms of the actual history, the actual past in terms of what he's supported. He's got a lot to fix if he wants to convince people, I think.
I'll tell you just from what I've heard and in my personal experience being in Washington a little, the guy loves the camera more than many other politicians. And I find that incredibly off-putting, and I think that comes across, honestly. Yeah,
he was very comfortable with Sarah Silverman. Maybe she'll run, who knows? It's gonna be a big pool.
I'd love that.
That'd be pretty awesome, actually. That's it, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Emma, thank you so much for joining us. If people would like to see more of your work, of course, they can go to Rebel HQ and see all the great work you do every day.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. We're gonna take one more break. When we come back, what is going on around the world and around the solar system? We'll let you know after this. So obviously we talk a lot about domestic politics here, but there is a lot going on outside of the US. So every once in a while, we like to step outside of our bubble in a segment we call Meanwhile in. Mars. Okay, so in Mars, did you know that we've just delivered another lander to the surface of another planet? I hope that you saw this news, because that is gigantic. This is the InSight lander, joined the Curiosity rover, which landed in 2012, and its 3 p.m. touchdown yesterday marked the first time in 6 years that a NASA spacecraft has landed on the red planet. Now, if you followed InSight and if you followed Curiosity, you might think, oh, this stuff is simple, but no, it's quite difficult. More than half of all missions don't make it safely to the surface because it takes more than 8 minutes for light signals to travel 100 million miles to Earth. Scientists have no control over the process. All they can do is program the spacecraft within their best technology and wait. In total, I believe that InSight went 300 million miles to get to Mars. And so again, there's that big delay between when information is sent from it to when we get it. So you had a room full of the best nerds in the country waiting It had either gotten to the surface or crashed, and they had to wait minutes to actually find out. And while it's there, InSight is going to do some pretty interesting research. It's going to operate for the next 2 Earth years, deploying a seismometer, a heat sensor, and radio antenna to probe the red planet's interior. Scientists hope that InSight will uncover signs of tectonic activity and clues about the planet's past. Those findings could illuminate how Mars became the desolate desert world we see today. Desolate overall, but we do believe that at one point it had a thicker atmosphere than it does today. There is some surface ice at the poles of Mars. There is a belief that there could well be large amounts of either ice or liquid water underneath. It's not necessarily clear that InSight will be able to detect that. But if we are to have some sort of sustainable human presence on Mars, that's going to be pretty important. And I just want to briefly say, we got a little thing all the way to Mars, and we landed it there, and it's like sort of news for a day. There's a lot of inspirational stuff that goes on around the planet. People are doing great things under very difficult circumstances, but this is definitely something that we as a species should take a couple of minutes out and like light a candle on a cupcake, at least something. This is a massive achievement for our species. Like we put something on the moon and that's great. You know, that's wonderful, and even decades later you get Ryan Gosling movies out of it, but Mars is way farther. And we were able to get something there yet again. Now this one's not gonna be driving around. The pictures aren't necessarily as cool as Curiosity just yet, but the research it's gonna generate is gonna be very important. So great job, NASA nerds. While all that's going on, meanwhile in Argentina, darker news. Prosecutors are considering charging Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, with war crimes and torture if he flies to Buenos Aires, as he is expected to for this week's G20 summit. So what is this about? Well, advocacy group Human Rights Watch wrote to a federal prosecutor arguing that the Argentinian courts should invoke a universal jurisdiction statute in Argentinian law to seek prosecution of the Crown Prince for mass civilian casualties caused by the Saudi-led coalition's campaign in Yemen, which we were talking about earlier, and for the torture of Saudi citizens, including Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on 2nd October, so just like 6 weeks ago. This is a story that I am going to continually bring up because it is astounding to me that we have done nothing here in the US to actually provide consequences for that brutal torture and murder and vivisection and dissection of Jamal Khashoggi that happened. Over the Thanksgiving break, when I wasn't here, Donald Trump said some of the most embarrassing and horrifying things I've ever seen a US president say, in basically admitting, it looks like he did it. It looks like Mohammed bin Salman actually ordered it. The CIA is saying that, but I don't care. We've got an arms deal. I don't even need the plausible deniability that I sort of had a month ago. Whatever, anything goes. And so if MBS wants to kill more political dissidents or reporters, go right ahead. Duterte, have at it. Go kill whoever you want. Putin, you're doing some poisonings, poison them all. As long as you have some sort of modicum of business, either with the US government or with the president personally, anything goes from now on. That is absolutely horrendous and should be horribly embarrassing for every American. Now, in Argentina, they might have charges against him. It seems pretty unlikely at this point, but I like that they're at least floating the possibility, keeping the message out there that MBS, who was being embraced by the world for some reason as a supposed moderate just a year or two ago, he should be an exile throughout the world. Whenever he goes abroad, he should be greeted in exactly this way, with at least the threat of some sort of charges against him. There's a lot of other politicians internationally that deserve the same sort of thing, but he definitely deserves it after this murder. So good to see that as well. Meanwhile, Japan. So did you know that Japan has tons of abandoned homes that now, thankfully, their government is launching a program to either give away or sell for virtually nothing to get people to move into these areas. They're launching that to reduce the overall number of abandoned homes. According to Insider, there have been any number, millions literally rising over the years. It says there in 2013 that there's 8 million houses, but I also saw that within something like a decade, they're thinking that that might rise by 50% to possibly more. It's a significant chunk of all of the homes that are currently available in Japan, by the way. And they have launched a website. You can go on, I actually took a look at it, and you can see these homes. I wouldn't say that they look amazing necessarily, but you're getting them for virtually nothing, and that saves a lot of money to do some, like home renovation. You can maybe talk to Anna Kasparian. She can help you, outfit it with some designer furniture or something. But Japan is a great country. I know that virtually everyone here at TYT has visited it in the last 2 weeks or so and absolutely loves it. So that could certainly help. Now, look, seriously, Japan is having a population crisis. Lots of people are moving to the urban areas as well and living in apartments. So a lot of these rural areas are getting abandoned. That's not good for a number of different reasons. And so this and other programs could be helpful in that area. That's what's going on around the world and around the solar system. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Damage Report. We'll see you tomorrow morning with lots more for you. Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.